We must begin this journey by addressing a silent tragedy that occurs every single morning in thousands of homes across the world. It is the tragedy of the sincere seeker who is doing everything right but getting everything wrong. You may be one of them. You wake up with hope in your heart. You stand before your mirror. You look into your own eyes and you repeat the phrases you have read in countless books. You say, "I am wealthy." You say, "I am healthy." You say, "I am successful." You say these words with intensity, trying to force them into your reality, but then you walk away and nothing changes. In fact, often things get worse. The debt grows larger. The silence from the job applications gets louder. The health issues persist. And you are left wondering if you are broken or if the universe is simply deaf to your voice. I am here to tell you that you are not broken, and the universe is not deaf. The problem is not your desire, and the problem is not your faith. The problem is a fundamental misunderstanding of the mechanism of your own mind. You are trying to plant seeds in a garden that is guarded by a vigilant soldier who refuses to let them pass. We need to talk about this soldier. We need to talk about the saboteur at the gate. To understand why your affirmations fail, you must first understand the architecture of your consciousness. You have two minds. You have the conscious mind, which is the thinking, analyzing, reasoning part of you. This is the part that worries about bills, checks the clock, and remembers past failures. Then you have the subconscious mind, the vast, silent powerhouse that actually creates your reality. The subconscious is the engine of manifestation. It has no logic. It has no judgment. It simply accepts whatever is impressed upon it and brings it to pass. If the subconscious believes you are poor, it will move heaven and earth to keep you poor. If it believes you are wealthy, it will bend reality to make you wealthy. The key to life is to impress the subconscious with the truth of your abundance. But here lies the great conflict. Standing between your conscious desire and your subconscious power is a gatekeeper. That gatekeeper is your logical, rational mind. Consider what happens when you are in a state of lack. Let us say you have an overdue notice on your table. Your stomach is tight with anxiety. Your logical mind knows that your bank account is empty. That is your current reality. Then, you try to use an affirmation. You say, "I am abundantly wealthy." What happens in that precise moment? The gatekeeper steps forward. Your logical mind hears that statement and immediately rejects it. It screams back at you. It says, "You are a liar." It says, "Look at the bank statement." It says, "Who are you fooling?" In that split second, a war breaks out inside you. You are pushing wealth with your words, but your mind is pushing poverty with its logic. And because the logical mind is backed by the evidence of your senses, it wins. The affirmation is not just rejected, it is crushed. The gatekeeper slams the door shut, and the seed of wealth never reaches the fertile soil of the subconscious. This is why traditional positive thinking often becomes a trap. When you try to force a positive thought over a negative belief, you create psychological tension. You are fighting yourself. And the spiritual law of non-resistance tells us that what you resist persists. By fighting the reality of your debt with a lie that you do not truly believe, you are actually focusing more energy on the debt. You are vibrating with the frequency of trying to be rich, which is an admission that you are currently poor. The subconscious mind does not listen to the words you speak. It listens to the feeling behind the words. If you say, "I am rich," but you feel terror, the subconscious hears terror. It hears lack. It hears desperation. And being a faithful servant, it gives you more things to be terrified about. This is the cruel irony of the saboteur. The harder you try to convince him, the more he resists you. You cannot fight this gatekeeper with logic, because he is the master of logic. You cannot fight him with facts, because the facts of your current life are on his side. We have been taught that the mind is a tool to be used, but for most people, the mind is a master to be obeyed. This rational mind is what the ancient teachers called the carnal mind. It is the mind of the five senses. It believes only what it can see, touch, taste, smell, and hear. It looks at a sickness and says it is incurable because the doctor said so. It looks at a bank balance and says you are bankrupt because the numbers say so. It is completely blind to the invisible realm of spirit, where all supply originates. When you try to use affirmations that contradict the evidence of the senses, the carnal mind treats you like a delusional person. It protects the status quo. It thinks it is keeping you safe by keeping you realistic. It does not know that its version of realism is a prison cell that keeps your good from reaching you. This internal civil war exhausts you. Have you ever felt tired after doing your affirmations? Have you ever felt a wave of hopelessness right after declaring your success? That is the backlash of the gatekeeper. It is the rebound effect. You pull the rubber band of faith as hard as you can, but because you have not bypassed the resistance, it snaps back and hits you. This is why thousands of people give up. They say this stuff does not work. They say, I tried it and nothing happened. They do not realize that they were standing outside the castle, shouting at the walls, never once getting the message to the king who sits on the throne inside. The king, your subconscious power, never heard the command because the guard at the gate threw it in the trash. So, are we doomed to this struggle? Must we always be victims of our own logic? Absolutely not. There is a way to bypass the guard. There is a way to slip past the saboteur without him even noticing. You see, the logical mind has a weakness. It is obsessed with argument. If you make a statement that can be argued, it will argue. If you say, I have $1 million, it argues, no you don't. But what if you could use a word that does not invite an argument? What if there was a language that the logical mind could not grab onto? A language that acts like a ghost, walking right through the walls of doubt and planting itself directly into the subconscious? Florence Scovel Shinn understood this secret mechanism better than almost anyone in the 20th century. She realized that we cannot win a wrestling match with our own doubts. We must be smarter than the doubt. We must use what I call a Trojan horse. In history, the Greeks could not conquer the city of Troy by fighting the guards at the gate. The walls were too high, and the guards were too strong, so they stopped fighting. They presented a gift. They built a wooden horse that looked harmless. The guards opened the gates and brought the horse in themselves. But inside the horse was the army that would take the city. You need a Trojan horse for your mind. You need a word that looks harmless to your fears, a word that your logic ignores because it doesn't understand it, but a word that is packed with the explosive power of divine truth. When you find this kind of word, everything changes. The struggle stops. You are no longer trying to convince yourself of anything. You are no longer lying to yourself about your current reality. You are simply dropping a pebble into a deep well. It goes past the surface tension, past the murky waters of your anxiety, and hits the bottom with a clear, resonant sound. This is the art of the anchor word. It is not an affirmation in the traditional sense. It is a command code. It is a password that the saboteur does not recognize, so he lets it pass. And once it is inside, once it reaches the superconscious mind, it begins to reorganize your reality from the inside out. It changes your vibration without your conscious mind even realizing what is happening until the results appear. In the story of Arthur that I am about to tell you, you will see a man who was defeated by logic. His rational mind had every reason to give up. The facts were 100% against him. If he had tried to use a standard affirmation like I am paying my rent, his mind would have laughed at him. He needed something stronger. He needed a weapon that could neutralize the saboteur instantly. He needed a word that was absolute, undeniable, and spiritually airtight. We are going to explore exactly how this works, but first, you must accept this fundamental truth. Your failure to manifest is not a failure of destiny. It is a mechanical failure. You have been using the wrong key for the lock. You have been banging on the door instead of sliding the bolt. Today, we stop fighting the gatekeeper. Today, We learn the language that makes him step aside and bow his head. Today, we stop the civil war and establish a kingdom of peace where your word is law. Prepare yourself, for once you understand how to bypass this saboteur, there is no dream that will be denied to you. The gate is about to open. To truly appreciate the magnitude of the miracle that is about to unfold, we must first descend into the valley where Arthur stood. We must understand the anatomy of his crisis, because his crisis is the mirror of every human struggle. It is easy to talk about faith when the sun is shining and the bank account is full. It is easy to be spiritual when the bills are paid. But the true test of metaphysical law does not happen in the comfort of a library. It happens in the cold, hard reality of the breaking point. Arthur's story represents the archetype of the dark night of the soul, that terrifying moment when the old world collapses and the new world has not yet been born. To understand the cure, we must fully understand the disease, and the disease Arthur faced was a perfect storm of material lack and spiritual exhaustion. The crisis did not announce itself with a trumpet blast. It did not arrive with the dramatic flare of a thunderstorm. It arrived with the terrifying quiet of a white envelope sliding under a door. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn. The sky over New York City was a sheet of relentless gray, pressing down on the skyline like a heavy woolen blanket. Inside his apartment, Arthur heard the soft rustle of paper against the floorboards. That sound, so innocent in any other context, stopped his heart. He knew what it was before he touched it. He walked to the door, his legs feeling heavy, and picked it up. The paper felt cold to the touch. It had the distinct, crisp texture of official legal correspondence. He opened it, and the words seemed to leap off the page, written in the unforgiving language of the law. Final notice of eviction. This was not a warning. This was a verdict. The legal machinery had ground to its conclusion. He had been given extensions. He had been given grace periods. But now, the clock had run out. The letter stated in bold, uncompromising terms that he had exactly 24 hours to pay the entire balance of his debt or vacate the premises. 24 hours. One rotation of the earth. The finality of it was suffocating. There was no person to call. There was no negotiation to be had. The landlord had lost patience, the bank had closed its ledger, and the law was on its way to physically remove him and his possessions from the only sanctuary he had left. The apartment, with its familiar walls and the furniture that held the memories of his life, suddenly felt alien, as if it had already rejected him. To understand Arthur's mental state, you must realize that he was not a reckless man. He was not a gambler who had thrown his fortune away on a spin of the wheel. He was not lazy. In fact, Arthur was the embodiment of the good citizen. He had played by the rules his entire life. He had built a small import business with his own hands, working long hours, sacrificing weekends, believing in the promise that hard work guarantees success. But the economy is a beast that does not respect individual effort. A sudden shift in trade regulations, combined with a series of investments that turned sour through no fault of his own, had caused the foundation of his livelihood to crack. For months, he had been trying to bail water out of a sinking ship. He had drained his savings account, dollar by dollar, hoping to turn the tide. He had sold his valuables. He had cut every expense. He had watched his life shrink until there was nothing left to cut. This slow erosion is often more painful than a sudden disaster. It is a daily hemorrhage of hope. Arthur had lived for months in a state of high-functioning anxiety. He would wake up in the middle of the night, his chest tight, his mind racing with calculations that never added up. He walked the streets of New York, a city of millions, feeling completely invisible. He saw the high-rise buildings, the luxury cars, the people rushing to expensive dinners, and he felt a profound sense of isolation. The city felt like a monster of steel and glass, indifferent to his suffering. He wondered how life could be so abundant for others and so barren for him. The shame of it was a physical weight. He began to avoid his neighbors, terrified they would see the failure in his eyes. He stopped answering the phone, afraid it was another creditor. He was a man drowning in plain sight, while the rest of the world swam past him. But the tragedy of Arthur was not just financial, it was spiritual, and this is where his story intersects with yours. Arthur was a seeker. He knew about the laws of mind. He had read the books. In the privacy of his apartment, he had tried to apply the teachings of positive thinking. He would stand in the center of his living room, surrounded by the silence of his poverty, and try to shout down his fear. He would say, "I am wealthy. God is my supply. Money is flowing to me." He tried to visualize checks in the mail. He tried to feel the emotion of relief. But every time he spoke a word of faith, his reality screamed back a word of doubt. This is the architecture of despair. It is the conflict between what you desire and what you believe. Arthur felt like a fraud. He felt like an actor in a tragedy who had forgotten his lines. As he affirmed, "I am abundant," his eyes would drift to the eviction notice on the table. The visual evidence of his failure was stronger than the mental image of his success. His logical mind, which Florence Scovel Shinn called the carnal mind, mocked him. It whispered, "Who are you kidding? Look at the facts. The bank account is zero. The rent is due. You are deluding yourself." This internal voice was not evil, it was rational. It was based on the evidence of the five senses. And because Arthur had been trained from birth to trust his logic, he believed the voice of the eviction notice more than he believed the voice of his affirmations. He was trapped in the prison of the reasoning mind. This mind is a wonderful tool for analyzing the past, but it is utterly incapable of creating a future that contradicts the present. The reasoning mind looks at the seed and sees only a hard shell. It cannot see the tree inside. Arthur's reasoning mind looked at his situation and calculated the odds. It said, "You have no income. You have no rich relatives. You have 24 hours. The probability of survival is zero." This logic paralyzed him. It created a feedback loop of fear. He would pray for a miracle and then immediately worry about how it could possibly happen. He would ask the universe for help and then frantically try to figure out a plan B, plan C, and plan D. This double-mindedness sent a chaotic signal to the universal substance. He was broadcasting desire and doubt simultaneously, creating a static noise that blocked any clear answer. The pain Arthur felt was the pain of betrayal. He felt betrayed by the principles he had tried to follow. He asked the question that haunts every person in crisis: why is this not working for me? I am a good person. I have tried to be positive. Why am I being punished? He did not realize that the universe does not punish, it only reflects. He was projecting a vibration of trying to get out of trouble, which is a vibration of being in trouble. He was fighting the poverty, wrestling with the debt, hating the landlord. And as we know, what you resist persists. His entire focus was on the problem. The eviction notice was not just a piece of paper. It had become an idol. He worshipped it with his fear. He gave it all his attention, all his energy, all his emotion. It became the biggest thing in his world, obscuring the sun of his divine supply. By the time the sun set on that Tuesday evening, Arthur had reached the end of his rope. He had exhausted his resources. He had exhausted his friends. He had exhausted his logic. Stood at the window, looking out at the cold lights of the city, and admitted defeat. The structure of his life had collapsed. He had no plan. He had no fight left. And ironically, this state of total defeat was the necessary precursor to his victory. The ego, the part of him that thought it could solve everything with hard work and worry, had finally been crushed. He was empty, and only when a vessel is empty can it be filled. He was about to learn that man's extremity is God's opportunity. But in that moment, standing in the shadow of the eviction, he did not feel hopeful. He felt the crushing weight of the impossible. He was trapped in a room with no doors, unaware that the walls were made of paper and could be blown down by a single word of truth. This was the bottom, and from the bottom, the only way to look was up. It was in the deepest valley of his shadow, when the logic of the world had completely failed him, that a lifeline appeared. It did not come in the form of a bank loan or a job offer. It came in the form of a memory. In the silence of his despair, Arthur recalled the name of a woman, Florence Scovel Shinn. He had heard of her not as a fortune teller, but as a teacher of metaphysical law, a woman who understood the geometry of the universe. He remembered a former associate saying that she taught people how to align with the invisible supply. At that moment, Arthur made a decision that defied all rationality. He reached into his pocket and found the last few coins he possessed. These coins were his lifeline for food, perhaps a loaf of bread to sustain him for one more day. But in a flash of intuitive courage, he decided to invest them in a different kind of sustenance. He decided to use them for the tram fare to travel to her office. This was his first act of active faith. He was trading his last physical security for a spiritual possibility. He walked out of his apartment, leaving the eviction notice on the table, and stepped into the noise of New York City, a pilgrim marching toward the only altar he had left. The journey was a blur of gray streets and indifferent faces, but when Arthur stepped into the building where Florence practiced, the atmosphere shifted. He entered her study, and immediately, the noise of the city fell away. There was a stillness in the room, a vibration of absolute peace that stood in contrast to the storm raging in his chest. He sat down before her. He was a broken man, his shoulders hunched under the weight of the 24-hour deadline. He poured out his story. He told her about the notice. He told her about the failed business. He told her about the sleepless nights. He laid his tragedy out on the table like a deck of cards, waiting for her to look at it and agree that it was hopeless. He waited for her to offer him sympathy, to tell him that he was a victim of cruel circumstances, or perhaps to advise him to pack his bags and accept his defeat with dignity. But Florence Scovel Shinn did none of these things. She looked at him with eyes that saw through the surface of appearances. She did not offer him pity, for she knew that pity would only validate his victimhood. Instead, she offered him a diagnosis as precise and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. She leaned forward and spoke the words that would dismantle his entire understanding of his struggle. She said to him that his problem was not the eviction notice. The eviction notice was merely a piece of paper, a shadow cast on a wall. His problem was not the lack of money, for money is merely a symbol of energy. She told him that his true problem was a civil war, a violent, bloody, and silent war that was being fought every second of every day within the territory of his own consciousness. She proceeded to explain the anatomy of this war. She told Arthur that he was a house divided against himself. One part of him, his conscious desire, was screaming for wealth and safety. But the other part of him, his vast and powerful subconscious mind, was programmed for disaster. She explained that the subconscious mind is the faithful servant of man, but it is also a creature of habit. It has no judgment. It simply obeys the strongest command it receives. For months, Arthur had been feeding his subconscious a diet of fear, worry, and calculations of debt. He had convinced his inner self that poverty was his reality. Now, when he tried to affirm, "I am prosperous," his subconscious mind treated that statement as a foreign invader. It viewed the idea of wealth as a threat to the established order of lack. Florence used a powerful metaphor. She told him to imagine his subconscious mind as a vigilant guardian at the gate of a fortress. This guardian's job is to protect the reality that has been established. When Arthur approached this gate with his affirmation of, "I am wealthy," the guardian looked at his bank account, looked at his debts, and looked at his fear, and shouted, "Liar." The guardian rejected the affirmation because it contradicted the evidence of the senses. This rejection was what Arthur felt as anxiety. Every time he tried to force a positive thought, he felt a backlash of negative emotion. This was the clash of the two minds. The conscious mind pushing forward, the subconscious mind pushing back. And because the subconscious mind controls 90% of our power, it was winning the war. It was neutralizing his prayers before they could even leave his lips. This diagnosis revealed the futility of Arthur's previous efforts. He had been trying to win this war with willpower. He thought that if he just tried harder, if he just squeezed his eyes shut tighter and visualized more intensely, he could force the manifestation. But Florence taught him the law of non-resistance. She explained that effort is a form of doubt. If you have to try to lift a pebble, it means you believe the pebble is heavy. If you have to try to believe in God, it means you do not truly believe. The tension Arthur felt in his body was the physical manifestation of his spiritual doubt. By fighting the debt mentally, he was actually giving it power. He was wrestling with the shadow, and the more he wrestled, the more real the shadow became to him. He was feeding the very monster he wanted to destroy with the energy of his own attention. Florence explained that the reasoning mind, or the carnal mind, is the great trickster. It relies entirely on the five senses. It says, I will believe it when I see it. But the spiritual law says, you will see it when you believe it. Arthur's reasoning mind was demanding proof of the money before it would relax. It was holding his peace hostage. It was acting as a lawyer for the prosecution, presenting endless evidence of why he should be evicted. Look at the calendar, it said. Look at the economy. Look at your empty pockets. This logical argumentation was the wall that kept the miracle out. As long as Arthur engaged in this debate, as long as he tried to use logic to solve a spiritual problem, he was doomed to fail. You cannot solve a problem on the same level of consciousness that created it. He had to rise above the logic. This was the core of the diagnosis. Arthur was suffering from double-mindedness. The Bible says, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. In the morning, Arthur would pray for relief. In the afternoon, he would curse his bad luck. In the evening, he would affirm abundance. At night, he would weep in terror. He was building a castle with one hand and tearing it down with the other. He was sending a chaotic, contradictory signal to the universal intelligence. The universe, which acts as a giant mirror, was reflecting this chaos back to him in the form of a chaotic and unstable life. Florence told him that until he could unify his mind, until he could get his conscious and subconscious to agree on the same truth, no amount of struggle would save him. The realization hit Arthur with the force of a physical blow. He realized that he was his own jailer. The landlord was not the enemy. The bank was not the enemy. They were simply actors playing the roles that Arthur's subconscious expectation had assigned to them. He had written the script of the eviction with his own fear, and they were faithfully performing it. This realization was painful, but it was also liberating, because if he was the cause, then he could be the cure. If his internal war was the source of the lack, then ending the war would be the source of the supply. He did not need to go out and rob a bank. He needed to go inside and declare a truce. Florence then prepared him for the solution. She told him that since he could not win this war by fighting, he had to win it by transcending. He needed a way to slip past the guardian at the gate. He needed a way to implant a seed of success into his subconscious without triggering the alarm bells of his logical mind. He needed a password, a specific vibration that would bypass the argument of the intellect and land directly in the center of his power. She told him that the only way to dissolve the resistance was to stop arguing with the reality of the debt and start dwelling in the reality of the divine design. She was about to hand him a weapon that his logical mind would not understand, and because it would not understand it, it would not fight it. Arthur sat in that chair, the noise of his internal battle quieting down for the first time in months. He realized that he had been trying to manipulate the outside world while leaving his inside world in ruins. He had been trying to paint over the cracks in a collapsing building. Florence had shown him the foundation. She had exposed the sabotage. The diagnosis was complete. The patient was ready. The war within had to end, not with a victory of the will, but with a surrender to the truth. And now, having exposed the enemy, Florence was ready to give him the weapon that would secure the victory. The stage was set for the introduction of the anchor word, the key that would turn the lock of his prison and set him free. Before I hand you the weapon that Florence gave to Arthur, the specific secret word that ended his internal war instantly, I want to invite you to join our sanctuary of wisdom. If you are ready to stop fighting yourself and start mastering your reality, confirm your commitment by subscribing to this channel right now. Click the like button to signal to the universe that you are open to receiving this solution. It is a small act of faith that prepares your mind for the revelation coming next. Are you ready for the word? Let's continue. With the diagnosis complete and the internal war exposed, the moment of transformation had arrived. Florence Scovel Shinn sat across from Arthur in the quiet sanctuary of her study. She knew that mere philosophy would not save him now. He had 24 hours before the sheriff arrived. He did not need a lecture on the history of metaphysics. He needed a weapon. He needed a tool so sharp and so effective that it could cut through years of negative programming in a single night. The atmosphere in the room shifted from analysis to instruction. Florence leaned forward, her presence commanding absolute attention, and prepared to hand Arthur the key that would unlock his prison cell. She explained to him that to defeat the saboteur at the gate, to bypass the relentless logic of the carnal mind, he needed a specific vibrational code. He needed a word that his intellect could not debate, a word that would act as a silencer to his fears and a megaphone to his faith. She told him that most people fail in their affirmations because they use the language of the conscious mind to try to change the subconscious. They use sentences like "I am wealthy" or "money is coming." These are statements of fact. And because the conscious mind is an evidence-gathering machine, it immediately checks these facts against reality. It looks at the bank account, sees zero, and rejects the affirmation as a lie. To bypass this, Florence explained, we must use the language of the superconscious. We must use a word that represents an absolute spiritual state, a word that has no opposite in the material world. We must use an anchor word. An anchor word is a verbal symbol that drops through the turbulent waves of panic and hooks itself directly into the bedrock of divine truth. It holds the ship steady, regardless of the storm. Florence looked Arthur in the eye and revealed the word. She said that this word was inexpugnable. Arthur stared at her. It was not a word he heard on the streets of New York. It was not a word used in business contracts. It sounded ancient. It sounded military. It sounded unshakable. Florence saw his confusion and nodded. That confusion, she explained, was exactly why the word would work. His logical mind had no file for it. His fears had no association with it. It was a clean vessel. She proceeded to unpack the staggering power contained within those syllables. Inexpugnable means incapable of being conquered, defeated, or taken by force. It refers to a fortress so strong, so perfectly designed, and so heavily fortified that no army on earth can breach its walls. When you declare that a situation is inexpugnable, you are saying that it is under the absolute protection of the Almighty. You are saying that your good is safe, your supply is secure, and your victory is guaranteed, regardless of what the external appearances may suggest. She explained the spiritual mechanics of why this specific word acts as a hack for the subconscious mind. If Arthur were to say, "I will pay the rent," his mind would ask how, and the doubt would begin. But when he says, "My supply is inexpugnable," the logical mind stops. It cannot ask how. Because inexpugnable describes a state of being, not a method of action. It lifts the problem out of the dimension of cause and effect and places it into the dimension of absolute truth. By using this word, Arthur was not asking for money. He was declaring that his financial life was a fortress that the eviction notice could not penetrate. He was defining his reality before the world could define it for him. The word acts as a shield. When the arrow of fear flies toward you, it hits the shield of inexpugnable and falls harmlessly to the ground. Florence did not just give him the word and send him away. She gave him a precise, military-grade protocol for how to use it. She knew that the next 24 hours would be a psychological battlefield. The enemy, his own fear, would launch wave after wave of attacks. The carnal mind would scream about the deadline. It would paint vivid pictures of him sleeping on a park bench. To survive this onslaught, Arthur needed to wield the anchor word with surgical precision. She laid out a 3-step command sequence that he was to follow under pain of failure. This was not a suggestion, it was a lifeline. The first step was the visual anchor. She instructed him to go home and write the word inexpugnable in bold, capital letters on a piece of paper. He was not to write a long prayer, just the word. He was to place this paper in the most visible spot in his apartment. Why? Because when panic strikes, the mind loses its ability to think clearly. He needed an external trigger. He needed something outside of himself to remind him of the truth when his internal world was collapsing. This piece of paper would serve as a lighthouse. Every time his eyes drifted to the eviction notice, he was to force them to look at the word inexpugnable. He was to create a visual contest between the lie of lack and the truth of abundance. The second step was the mental interruption. Florence warned him that the thoughts of fear would come. They would come with speed and intensity. What if the sheriff comes? What if I am humiliated? She told him that the moment, the very microsecond, he felt that familiar tightening in his chest, he must attack. He was not to entertain the thought. He was not to argue with the thought. He was to drop the anchor word on top of the thought, like a 10-ton weight. He was to say, audibly if possible, or silently with great force, inexpugnable, and then he was to complete the decree. My world and my affairs are inexpugnable. She explained that he could not hold two thoughts at the same time. He could not think I am ruined and I am inexpugnable simultaneously. By forcing the anchor word into his mind, he would physically displace the fear. It was an act of mental displacement. The third step was the act of normalcy. This was the hardest command of all. She told him that after he spoke the word, he must act as if the danger had passed. He must engage in normal activities. He must cook his dinner. He must read his book. He must polish his shoes. She explained that this was the proof of his faith. If a man believes his fortress is inexpugnable, he does not pace the floor in terror. He sleeps soundly. If he paces the floor, he is telling the universe that he does not trust the wall. By acting normally, Arthur would be sending a powerful signal to the subconscious that the emergency was over. He would be vibrating at the frequency of safety. And the universe, which responds to vibration, would have no choice but to match that safety with a physical solution. Florence emphasized that this word was a bridge. It bridged the gap between his human limitation and divine limitlessness. She told him that when he spoke the word inexpugnable, he was not speaking it alone. He was aligning his voice with the voice of the infinite. He was authorizing the universe to defend him. She reminded him that in the spiritual realm, there is no such thing as a last minute. There is only the divine now. The solution was already prepared. It was waiting for him to stop vibrating with fear so that it could land. The anchor word was the landing signal. It cleared the runway of his mind so that the supply could arrive. Arthur listened, and for the first time in months, he felt a shift in his solar plexus. The logic of the world said he was finished, but the logic of the spirit said he was just beginning. He realized that this word was not magic, it was technology. It was spiritual technology designed to hack the operating system of his own mind. He saw that he had been using his words to build a prison, and now he had been given a sledgehammer to break the walls. He looked at the eviction notice in his mind's eye, and then he looked at the word inexpugnable. He realized that the notice was paper, but the word was power. One was a temporary fact. The other was an eternal truth. He stood up to leave, and Florence gave him one final instruction. She told him that the battle would be won or lost in the silence of his own room that night. If he could hold the anchor word in his consciousness until the morning, if he could refuse to let the fear enter his fortress, the outer world would have to conform. "The morning always comes," she said, "but you decide what the morning brings." Arthur walked out of that office not as a beggar, but as a soldier armed with a weapon of mass creation. He grasped the concept of the anchor word with a desperate, holy grip. He was ready to test the law. He was ready to prove that one word of truth is heavier than the whole world of facts. The weapon was in his hand. Now, he had to go home and use it. The tram ride back to his apartment was a journey between two worlds. Physically, Arthur was still in the New York of the Depression era. The streets were still gray. The faces of the passengers were still etched with the weariness of survival, and the cold wind still bit through his thin coat. But internally, he was walking on a different earth. He was holding a secret. He was carrying a weapon that was invisible to the naked eye, but more powerful than the steel of the tram tracks beneath him. He was no longer a victim returning to the scene of a crime. He was a commander returning to his post. The instructions from Florence Scovel Shinn were ringing in his mind like a church bell. The anchor word inexpugnable was pulsing in his blood. He was about to enter the ring for the greatest fight of his life, but for the first time in months, he felt equipped to win. He unlocked the door to his apartment. The air inside was stale, heavy with the accumulated anxiety of the past few weeks. The silence was absolute. And there, on the small wooden table in the center of the room, lay the enemy. The eviction notice. It sat there like a tombstone, stark white against the dark wood, promising ruin by the next sunrise. For a brief, terrifying moment, the old conditioning tried to reassert itself. His heart hammered against his ribs. His stomach tightened into a cold knot. The carnal mind whispered, "Look at that paper. That is reality. The word you learned in that office is just a fantasy. You are going to lose everything." This was the critical juncture. This was the moment where most people fail. They hear the truth in the teacher's office, but they lose it the moment they confront the evidence of the problem. But Arthur did not buckle. He remembered the protocol. He walked straight to the desk, not with the shuffle of a defeated man, but with the stride of purpose. He took a blank piece of paper and a thick pen. He sat down and wrote the word. He did not scribble it, he carved it. Inexpugnable. He wrote it in bold, defiant capital letters. Then, he performed a simple but profound act of spiritual warfare. He placed his handwritten word directly next to the printed eviction notice. He created a visual altar of choice. On the left was the verdict of man, eviction. On the right was the decree of spirit, inexpugnable. He forced himself to look at both. He forced his eyes to move from the problem to the solution. He told himself, that notice is a fact, but this word is the truth. And the truth overrides the fact. As the afternoon faded into the long shadows of evening, the real battle began. You must understand that the dark night of the soul is not a poetic metaphor, it is a psychological reality. As the distractions of the day disappear and the silence of the night closes in, the subconscious fears become louder. The carnal mind, realizing its control is being threatened, launches an all-out assault. Arthur tried to read a book, but the words swam before his eyes. The voice in his head became screamingly loud. "It is 8 p.m., it said. "You have no money. The banks are closed. Who is going to help you at this hour? You are insane." The images of humiliation flashed before him. The sheriff knocking, the neighbors watching, his belongings on the sidewalk. This was the fire test. Arthur felt the wave of panic rising, hot and suffocating. But he did not run from it. He did not try to distract himself with busy work. He stood his ground. He closed his eyes and summoned the anchor word. He spoke it out loud into the empty room. Inexpugnable. He said it again, louder. Inexpugnable. He envisioned the word as a massive, impenetrable wall of white light surrounding him. He declared, "My world and my affairs are inexpugnable." He did not try to argue with the fear. He did not say, "But maybe the landlord will be nice." He knew that arguing with fear is useless. Instead, he dropped the anchor word on top of the fear, like a heavy stone dropping onto a flame. He suffocated the doubt with the word. A strange thing began to happen. The panic did not vanish instantly like a magic trick. It was more like a storm crashing against a thick glass window. The wind was still howling. The rain was still beating. But Arthur was suddenly inside, dry and safe. The fear was out there, but he was in here. The anchor word had created a separation between his soul and his anxiety. He realized that he was the observer of the fear, not the victim of it. He sat in his chair and continued the practice. Every time a thought of "what if" arose, he met it with inexpugnable. It became a rhythm, a mantra, a heartbeat. He was reprogramming his mind in real time. He was literally overwriting the neural pathways of failure with the code of victory. Then came the hardest instruction to follow, the act of normalcy. Florence had told him to act as if the victory were won. His instinct was to pace the floor, to wring his hands, to stay awake, keeping a vigil over his misery. But a man who is safe does not pace the floor. A man whose fortress is inexpugnable sleeps. Arthur forced himself to go through his nightly routine. He brushed his teeth. He laid out his clothes for the next morning. He polished his shoes. Think of the audacity of this act. Here was a man who, by all rights, should have been packing boxes. Instead, he was polishing his shoes for a new day. This was active faith. This was digging the ditch in the desert. He was telling his subconscious, "We are staying. We are continuing. There is no end here, only a new beginning." As he lay down in his bed, the final assault came. The silence of the bedroom was deafening. The clock ticked on the wall tick-tock, counting down the minutes to his doom. "You are a fool," the darkness whispered. "Tomorrow is the end." Arthur lay flat on his back and stared at the ceiling. He took a deep breath and handed the burden over. He realized that he had done all he could do. He had visited the teacher. He had received the word. He had applied the law. Now, the battle belonged to the universe. He whispered the word one last time, letting it sink into the marrow of his bones. Inexpugnable. And then, the miracle of the night occurred. It was not a flash of lightning. It was the descent of peace. It was the peace that passes understanding, because it made no logical sense. By all logic, he should be hyperventilating. But instead, a heavy, warm blanket of tranquility settled over him. It was the feeling of a child who realizes his father is awake and watching the house so he can go back to sleep. Arthur stopped trying to figure out the how. He released the need to know the name of his savior. He released the need to know the time of the delivery. He trusted the law. He knew that the anchor word had been received by the universal subconscious, and that the great machinery of God was turning, silently and invisibly, to orchestrate his rescue. He closed his eyes and drifted into sleep. This sleep was his greatest act of defiance. To sleep in the face of ruin is the ultimate proof of faith. It was a declaration that he trusted the invisible more than the visible. While he slept, his conscious mind, the saboteur, was finally offline. The gate was left unguarded, and into that open gate poured the power of the anchor word. For 8 hours, while his body rested, his spirit was being marinated in the vibration of inexpugnable. The word was working on him, repairing the breaches in his faith, magnetizing his aura, and sending out a homing signal to the specific solution that was already moving toward him through the night. The city outside slept. The landlord slept, believing he would evict Arthur in the morning. The bank manager slept, but the law never sleeps. The law was active, moving people, moving circumstances, aligning timing. Arthur slept the sleep of the just, unaware that he had successfully passed the initiation. He had faced the terror of the void and had filled it with the word. He had stood in the fire and had not been burned. The night passed. The gray light of dawn began to creep across the floor, inching toward the eviction notice and the handwritten decree. The deadline was here, but Arthur was no longer the man who had walked up the stairs the evening before. He had gone to sleep a beggar, and he was about to wake up a master. The silence of the night had done its work. The vessel was prepared, the ditch was dug, and now the rain was ready to fall. The sun rose over the skyline of New York City, casting a pale, indifferent light onto the brick buildings. For millions of people, it was just another Wednesday. But for Arthur, this sunrise marked the deadline of his existence. The 24-hour grace period had expired. According to the laws of man and the logic of the bank, he was now a trespasser in his own home. By noon, the sheriff would arrive to escort him to the curb. Any ordinary man in this situation would be paralyzed with terror. He would be frantically packing boxes, weeping, or making desperate last-minute phone calls. But Arthur was no longer an ordinary man. He had passed through the initiation of the night. He had merged his consciousness with the anchor word. As he stood by the window sipping his coffee, he realized with a shock that the knot of fear in his stomach had vanished. In its place was a strange, vibrating stillness. He was waiting not for an execution, but for an appointment. He did not know who the appointment was with, but he knew with absolute certainty that the anchor word inexpugnable had not been spoken in void. It had gone out, and it would not return empty. He continued to follow the instruction of acting as if. He shaved. He dressed in his best suit. He straightened the apartment. He sat down in his armchair and waited. He was holding the space. He was keeping the vibration high. And then, at exactly 10 a.m., the sound came. It was a knock on the door. It was distinct, firm, and polite. It did not sound like the heavy, aggressive fist of a landlord coming to collect a debt. It sounded like a visitor. Arthur stood up. His heart gave a single, strong beat of anticipation. He walked to the door, and in his mind, he whispered the password one last time. Inexpugnable. He opened the door, ready to face whatever reality stood on the other side. Standing in the hallway was not the sheriff. It was not the landlord. It was a man Arthur had never seen before. He was an elegant man, dressed in a fine wool coat, with a face that radiated intelligence and kindness. There was an air of prosperity about him, but also an air of gentleness. The stranger smiled and asked, "Are you Arthur?" Arthur nodded, bewildered but calm. The man extended his hand and introduced himself. He was a renowned landscape painter, an artist whose name Arthur vaguely recognized from the cultural columns of the newspapers. This was the first twist of the key. Why was a famous artist standing at the door of a bankrupt man on the morning of his eviction? The artist apologized for the intrusion and asked if he could come in. Arthur stepped aside, and the stranger walked into the modest apartment. But he did not look at the furniture or the lack of luxury. He walked straight to the window and looked out at the specific angle of the light hitting the building across the street. He turned back to the room and sighed with deep, visible emotion. He explained to Arthur that 30 years ago, when he was a young, starving student, he had lived in this very apartment. He told Arthur that the light in this room was unique. It was in this room, facing that window, that he had painted the canvas that launched his career. He said that this space was his spiritual birthplace. He had traveled the world, lived in mansions, and seen the finest views in Europe, but his soul had been calling him back to this specific grid of coordinates in New York City. Arthur listened, stunned. He began to see the threads of the divine tapestry weaving together before his eyes. The artist continued. He explained that he was now a man of considerable means, but he felt a need to reconnect with his roots. He wanted a private studio in the city, a sanctuary where he could retreat from his fame and paint in peace. He had been looking for weeks, but nothing felt right. That morning, he had woken up with an irresistible, burning impulse to visit his old home. He did not know who lived there. He did not know if it was available. He simply followed the hunch. This is the precision of the universal mind. While Arthur was chanting inexpugnable in the night, the universe was waking up this artist across town and planting a seed of nostalgia in his heart. The anchor word acted as a magnet, pulling the specific person who held the specific solution. The artist turned to Arthur with a look of hesitation. He said that he knew this was an extraordinary request, and he knew it would be a massive inconvenience for Arthur to move out on such short notice. He assumed Arthur was settled and secure. He had no idea Arthur was hours away from being thrown out. And then he made the proposition that defied all laws of probability. He said that he wanted to take over the lease of the apartment immediately. He wanted to buy Arthur out of his tenancy. And because he realized he was disrupting Arthur's life, he was prepared to offer a significant financial compensation for the trouble. He asked Arthur if he would be willing to relocate if the price was right. Arthur stood there, keeping his face composed, while inside his soul was singing a hymn of victory. He nodded slowly and asked what figure the artist had in mind. The artist named a sum. Time seemed to stop in the room. The number hung in the air, shimmering with divine mathematical perfection. It was not a random number. It was not a round figure, like 1,000 or 5,000. It was a specific amount. Arthur did the calculation instantly in his head. The sum was exactly enough to pay the entire back rent owed to the landlord. It covered the legal fees of the eviction notice. It covered the deposit for a new, modest apartment, and it left a surplus for moving expenses and food for a month. It was the exact weight of the burden, lifted to the penny. It was not $1 too much, which might have burdened him, nor $1 too little, which would have left him stranded. It was the daily bread of the Lord's Prayer, manifested as a check. The artist, misinterpreting Arthur's silence as hesitation, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He said that he was serious and eager to close the deal. He asked if he could write the check right now to secure the agreement. Arthur, maintaining the dignity of a man who had known the outcome all along, simply said yes. He watched as the artist uncapped his fountain pen. He watched the ink flow onto the paper. He watched the numbers being formed, the very numbers that would liberate him from his cage. The artist tore the check from the book and handed it to Arthur. Arthur held the check. It was a piece of paper, just like the eviction notice was a piece of paper. But while the eviction notice was a decree of death, this check was a decree of life. It was the physical materialization of the word inexpugnable. It was the hard evidence that faith is not a vapor. It is a force that moves assets. The transaction was completed. The artist shook his hand, beaming with happiness, thinking he was the one who had received the favor. He thanked Arthur for his flexibility, unaware that he had just acted as an angel of deliverance. He left the apartment, promising to return in a few days to take possession. An hour later, the inevitable confrontation occurred. The landlord arrived. He came with a dark face, expecting a fight, expecting excuses, expecting to call the sheriff. He found Arthur standing in the center of the room, packed and ready. There was no fear in Arthur's eyes, only a calm, piercing authority. Arthur did not beg. He did not explain. He simply handed the endorsed check to the landlord. The landlord looked at the check. He looked at the amount. He looked at the signature of the famous artist. He was speechless. The logic of the situation had been shattered. By all rights, Arthur should be on the street. But here he was, paying his debt in full, with dignity intact, moving on to a new life. The landlord took the check and left, confused by a reality he could not understand. This was the divine arrival. But we must pause and analyze the metaphysics of this moment, for it contains the secret for your own life. Notice that the money did not fall from the sky. It did not appear in a puff of smoke. It came through a natural channel, a human being, but it was organized by supernatural intelligence. This is the law of channels. The universe uses people, events, and circumstances to deliver your good. But it can only use them if you are vibrationally open. If Arthur had spent the night crying and vibrating in fear, he would have built a wall of static around his apartment. The artist might have felt the impulse to visit but decided to wait. Or he might have come, sensed the desperation and heaviness in the air, and decided he didn't want the apartment after all. Arthur's state of inexpugnable peace was the open door that welcomed the guest. Notice also the law of substitution. The artist needed the apartment. Arthur needed the money. The divine design satisfied both needs perfectly. One man's need became the other man's solution. In the divine mind, there is no competition and no lack. There is only perfect fitting. The puzzle pieces were scattered, but the anchor word brought them together. And finally, notice the precision. The check was exactly what was needed. This reminds us that God is never late and God is never lack. We often stress because we want a surplus before we have a need. We want the money in the bank years before the bill arrives. But Spirit works in the eternal now. The supply meets the demand at the exact point of intersection. Arthur stood alone in the apartment one last time. He looked at the table where the two pieces of paper had lain side by side, the eviction notice and the handwritten word. The eviction notice had been nullified. The word had been vindicated. He realized that the apartment had been a classroom. He had entered it as a student of fear, and he was leaving it as a graduate of faith. He put the check in his pocket, picked up his suitcase, and walked out the door. He walked out into the streets of New York, but the city no longer looked like a monster of steel. It looked like a playground of possibilities. He knew now that he carried the key to the city in his own mind. He knew that no wall could ever hold him again, for he knew the password. He knew that wherever he went, whatever challenge he faced, he was inexpugnable. The check was money, but the lesson was wealth. And that wealth was something no market crash could ever take away. A few days after the miraculous intervention that saved his home and his dignity, Arthur made a second pilgrimage. He returned to the office of Florence Scovel Shinn, but this time, the man who walked through the door bore no resemblance to the broken, trembling figure who had entered just 48 hours earlier. The slump in his shoulders was gone. The gray pallor of fear had been replaced by the flush of vitality. He walked with the confident stride of a man who has looked into the abyss and found a bridge. He sat down and recounted the events to Florence. He told her every detail, the agonizing night of holding the word, the silence of the morning, the knock on the door, the appearance of the artist, and the mathematical precision of the check. He spoke with the breathless excitement of someone who has just witnessed a magic trick. He expected Florence to be astonished. He expected her to gasp at the sheer improbability of a stranger appearing out of nowhere to pay off his debt. But Florence sat there, calm and composed, with a knowing smile playing on her lips. She was not surprised. She did not gasp. To her, this was not a magic trick. It was physics. It was the predictable result of a spiritual experiment conducted correctly. She explained to Arthur that what he called a miracle was simply the operation of a higher law superseding a lower law. Just as the laws of aerodynamics allow a plane to defy the law of gravity, the law of grace allows the spirit to defy the law of lack. The eviction was the result of the law of karma, cause and effect based on fear. The artist was the result of the law of grace deliverance based on faith. Arthur had simply switched laws. He had moved his citizenship from the kingdom of fear to the kingdom of faith, and the laws of that new kingdom had immediately taken effect to protect him. We must now pause and perform a forensic analysis of this victory, because within this story lies the blueprint for your own freedom. We must strip away the romance of the narrative and look at the mechanical gears of the spiritual engine that drove this outcome. Why did it work? Why did the artist appear? And why does it fail for so many others? The first principle we see in action here is the law of divine channels. Many people make the mistake of dictating to the universe exactly how they want their money to arrive. Arthur could have made the fatal error of praying for a bank loan. He could have visualized finding a bag of cash on the street. If he had done that, he would have been outlining the channel. He would have been telling infinite intelligence how to do its job. But the human mind is limited. It can only imagine solutions based on what it has seen before. The universal mind is unlimited. It sees connections that are invisible to us. Arthur did not know the artist existed. He did not know the artist's history with the apartment. If Arthur had tried to figure out the how, he would never in a million years have come up with this scenario. By using the anchor word inexpugnable, he released the channel. He focused on the what, safety, supply, and left the how to the wisdom of the superconscious. The universe looked at the chessboard of New York City, saw Arthur's need, saw the artist's desire, and realized they were the perfect match. It moved the artist like a chess piece to Arthur's door. This leads us to the second principle, the law of non-resistance. This is the hardest lesson for the ego to accept. The ego believes that results come from struggle, from fighting, from manipulation. But Florence explained to Arthur that if he had spent that final night pacing the floor, crying, and vibrating with terror, he would have built an invisible wall around his apartment. Fear is a dense vibration. It acts like static noise on a radio frequency. If Arthur had been broadcasting fear, the artist might have woken up with the impulse to visit. But as he got closer to the building, he would have felt a subconscious repulsion. He might have changed his mind. He might have decided to come next week. The static of Arthur's fear would have blocked the signal. But because Arthur used the anchor word to reach a state of peace, he cleared the airwaves. He created a vacuum of serenity. And nature abhors a vacuum. It rushes to fill it. The artist was pulled in by the magnetic force of Arthur's non-resistance. The solution can only enter when the problem ceases to be the focus of your attention. Furthermore, we must analyze the law of substitution. On the surface, it looked like Arthur was losing his home. The eviction notice said, "Get out." But in the divine mind, there is no loss, only substitution. One door closes so that a better one can open. Arthur thought he wanted to stay in that apartment, but the universe knew that the apartment had served its purpose. It was time for him to move on, to start fresh, to leave behind the energy of his past failures. The eviction was not a punishment. It was a push. It was a divine shove toward his next level of good. But he needed the money to make the transition. The universe used the artist to facilitate this substitution. The artist got the studio he wanted. Arthur got the freedom and the capital he needed. It was a perfect exchange. Often, what we call a disaster is just the wrapping paper around a gift we do not yet recognize. If Arthur had fought the eviction tooth and nail, he might have stayed in a place where he was stagnant. By trusting the word inexpugnable, he allowed the substitution to take place gracefully, with his pockets full instead of empty. Florence then illuminated the most subtle aspect of the law, the timing of spirit. Arthur received the money on the very morning of the deadline. Why did it have to be so close? Why couldn't the money have arrived a week earlier to save him the stress? This is a question every seeker asks. The answer lies in the necessity of total surrender. Often, we do not truly let go until we are at the edge of the cliff. If Arthur had received the money a week earlier, he might have thought it was just luck. He might have attributed it to his own cleverness. But because it came at the 11th hour, after he had exhausted all human resources, he knew without a shadow of a doubt that it was the Spirit. The timing forced him to rely entirely on the anchor word. It burned the bridges of his ego. The stress of the waiting was the fire that purified his faith. The universe is never late, but it is rarely early. It arrives exactly when the vessel is ready to receive, and not a moment before. We must also look at the role of the anchor word itself. Why inexpugnable? Why not simply God help me? The analysis shows that God help me is often a cry of desperation that affirms the reality of the danger. It implies that there is a victim who needs rescuing. But inexpugnable is a statement of fact. It affirms a state of impregnable safety that already exists. It shifts the identity from victim to victor. Florence taught that words are vibrational tuning forks. When Arthur spoke that word, he tuned his consciousness to the frequency of the absolute. In the absolute, there are no debts. In the absolute, there are no evictions. By holding that frequency, he brought a piece of the absolute down into the relative world of time and space. The check was simply the condensed energy of that word. Florence warned Arthur, and she warns us now, that this was not a one-time event. The law is not a lottery ticket that you win once and then retire. It is a way of life. The intellect, the carnal mind, will always try to reclaim its territory. It will look at this event and try to dismiss it as a wild coincidence. It will say, "You got lucky this time, Arthur, but next time you better worry." This is the danger of the aftermath. We often forget the miracle as soon as the crisis is past. We go back to our old habits of worry and manipulation. Florence told Arthur that he must now guard his mind more vigilantly than ever. He had proven the law, but now he had to live the law. He had to realize that the power was not in the artist, the power was in his own consciousness. The artist was just the delivery boy. Arthur was the author of the command. This analysis brings us to the ultimate conclusion. You are the operant power. There is no external force withholding your good. There is no destiny written in stone that says you must be poor. There is only the mechanical operation of your own subconscious mind. You have been given the manual. You have been given the keys. The story of Arthur is not a fable. It is a case study. It proves that when the human mind stops trying to play God and starts trusting God, the impossible becomes possible. It proves that there is an invisible supply that is watching you right now, taking the shape of your beliefs. If you believe in limits, it will show you limits. If you believe in the inexpugnable fortress of your good, it will show you miracles. Arthur left Florence's office that day with more than just a solved problem. He left with a new identity. He was no longer a man subject to the whims of the economy. He was a master of his own fate. He understood that the world is a mirror. If he smiled at it with faith, it had to smile back. If he frowned at it with fear, it had to frown back. The check was gone, cashed and spent, but the understanding remained. And that understanding is what I am handing to you now. You have seen the mechanics. You have seen the gears turn. The mystery has been removed. All that is left is the application. You do not need to be a saint. You do not need to be a genius. You just need to be willing to stop the war within and speak the word of peace. The law works for Arthur. It works for the artist. And it will work for you. It is impersonal. It is exact. It is waiting. We have traveled a great distance together in this session. We have descended into the crushing despair of Arthur's eviction, walked the gray streets of his hopelessness, sat in the sanctuary of wisdom with Florence Scovel Shinn, and witnessed the dazzling mechanics of the miracle that saved him. You have seen the check. You have seen the artist. You have analyzed the laws of substitution and non-resistance. But now, the story of Arthur must end so that the story of you can begin. Information without application is merely entertainment. If you shut this video off now and return to your life without changing your mental posture, then Arthur's victory remains a fairy tale. But if you seize this moment, if you grasp the weapon I am placing in your hand, then Arthur's victory becomes a prophecy for your own life. The torch is being passed to you. You are no longer the audience. You are the protagonist. You are standing in your own apartment, holding your own eviction notice, and the universe is waiting to see what you will do. First, we must identify your eviction notice. For Arthur, it was a literal piece of paper demanding he leave his home. For you, it might be something different, but the vibration is the same. Perhaps it is a medical diagnosis that says your body is failing. Perhaps it is a stack of unpaid bills that scream you are a failure. Perhaps it is divorce papers, or a letter of termination from your job, or simply the crushing weight of loneliness that tells you you will never be loved. Whatever it is, the carnal mind is using it to terrorize you. It is pointing at the facts and saying, "This is the end." I am here to tell you, with the authority of the law, that this is not the end. It is simply the darkness before the dawn. It is the raw material out of which you will build your greatest triumph. The eviction notice is not a verdict, it is a bluff. And you are about to call that bluff. You need an anchor word. We have discussed the power of inexpugnable. This word saved Arthur because it bypassed his intellect. It described a fortress that cannot be taken. If this word resonates with you, if it makes you feel strong and protected, then claim it. Make it your shield. But perhaps you need a different frequency. The law respects your individuality. Perhaps your word is victory. When the thoughts of failure come, you simply say, "Victory." Perhaps your word is completed. When the bills pile up, you declare, "It is completed." Perhaps your word is plenty. Find the word that feels like a rock in your gut. A word that admits no argument. A word that does not plead, but establishes. This word is your sword. You must not leave it in the sheath. Here is your assignment. This is not a suggestion. It is a spiritual prescription for the next 24 hours. You are going to enter your own night of faith. I want you to take a piece of paper right now. Do not wait until later. Do not wait until you feel ready. Take a pen and write your anchor word in bold, capital letters. Stick it on your bathroom mirror. Stick it on your dashboard. Stick it on your refrigerator. This is your visual trigger. The carnal mind is hypnotic. It will try to pull you back into the trance of worry. You need this visual shock to snap you out of it. Every time your eyes land on that word, you are reminding your subconscious, we are under new management. The era of fear is over. The era of command has begun. Tonight, the real work begins. When the lights go out and the world goes quiet, the wolves of worry will come. They always do. They will whisper, "Who do you think you are? You can't fix this. It's too late." This is the moment of truth. Most people engage with these wolves. They argue with them. They try to reason with their fear. Do not do this. You cannot fight a thought with a thought. You must fight a thought with a word. When the fear comes, do not flinch. Speak your anchor word. Say, inexpugnable. Drop it like a hammer. Smash the fear with the weight of that word. Say, my health is inexpugnable. My wealth is inexpugnable. My peace is inexpugnable. Do not look for the feeling of relief. Just do the work. The relief will come later. Your job is to hold the line. You are the watchman on the wall. Do not let the enemy enter the city. Then, you must perform the act of normalcy. This is the acting as if that we saw Arthur perform when he polished his shoes. You must do something that proves you believe your own decree. If you are asking for financial freedom, organize your wallet. Clean out your purse. Throw away the old receipts that smell of poverty. Make space for the new money. If you are asking for health, plan your outfit for next week's party. If you are asking for love, sleep on one side of the bed to make room for your partner. These acts seem small to the rational mind, but to the subconscious mind, they are explosive. They are physical evidence that the conscious mind has accepted the good. You are digging your ditches. You are preparing the vessel. You are telling the universe, I trust you enough to act before I see. You must understand the nature of the decree. The Bible says, Thou shalt decree a thing, and it shall be established unto you. A decree is not a request. A beggar requests. A king decrees. When the president signs an executive order, he does not ask if everyone agrees. He signs it, and the machinery of the government moves to execute it. You are the president of your own universe. Your anchor word is your executive order. When you speak it, you are mobilizing the invisible forces of the cosmos. Angels, opportunities, coincidences, and resources begin to shift in response to your command. You may not see the movement yet. Arthur did not see the artist waking up across town. He did not see the check being written in the mind of the stranger, but the movement was happening. You must have the endurance to trust what you cannot see. The carnal mind will try to tell you that you are deluding yourself. It will say, you are just saying words. Nothing is changing. Recognize this voice for what it is. The dying gasp of the old program. It is the saboteur trying to scare you back into your cell. Laugh at it. Say to it, I have the key now. Your logic has no power here. Stand firm in your irrational faith. Remember that every great miracle in history, from the parting of the Red Sea to the healing of the blind, looked like a delusion until the moment it happened. You are walking in the footsteps of giants. Do not apologize for your faith. Wear it like armor. This is a lifestyle, not a quick fix. Arthur didn't just use the word once and then go back to worrying. He became a different man. He became a man who walked with the awareness of the divine fortress. You must do the same. Tomorrow, when you walk out into the world, carry your anchor word with you. When the news talks about a recession, touch the word in your mind. When your boss is angry, touch the word. When the bill comes, touch the word. It is your secret weapon. It is your connection to the absolute. It keeps you in the world, but not of it. It allows you to walk through the fire and not smell of smoke. I want to issue a challenge to you. I want you to prove this law for yourself. Do not take my word for it. Do not take Florence Scovel Shinn's word for it. The law does not care if you believe in it. It only cares if you use it. Electricity will light your house, whether you understand it or not, provided you flip the switch. The anchor word is the switch. Flip it. Give this experiment everything you have for the next 7 days. Commit to a week of mental diet. Refuse to speak a single word of lack. Refuse to entertain a single thought of defeat. If you slip, catch yourself instantly and slam the anchor word down. Be ruthless with your own negativity. If you are ready to accept this mission, if you are ready to step out of the shadows and into the light of your own power, I ask you to seal this pact right now. This is not just a video. This is an initiation. You are crossing a threshold. I want you to verify your commitment physically. Go to the comments section below. I want you to write your anchor word for the whole world to see. Write, my supply is inexpugnable. Or write, I am the fortress. When you write it, you are etching it into the physical record. You are declaring to the universe, I am here. I am awake. I am ready. Join the thousands of others who are making this decree. Let their strength be your strength. And do not let this connection fade. This channel is a sanctuary for those who are waking up. We are building an army of commanders, men and women who refuse to be victims of circumstance. Subscribe to this channel right now. Make it your daily source of ammunition. We will continue to uncover the lost secrets of power. We will continue to hand you the keys to the kingdom. Do not miss the next transmission. As you turn off this video and look around your room, remember Arthur. Remember the check that came from a stranger. Remember that the walls of your problem are paper thin. You have the match in your hand. Strike it. Light the fire of your faith. Speak the word. Stand tall. The universe is not somewhere out there. It is right here, listening to your heartbeat, waiting for your command. You are the operant power. You are the divine channel. You are the master of your fate. Go now, and let the miracle begin. It is done. It is done. It is done.